All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hump Day Hangout. This is the close to Christmas edition. Today is the day I start coughing while doing this. It is the 22nd of December. We're just a few days away from Christmas. And this is episode 371, I believe. So yep. I am in the car. Let's see. Chris is in Austria. Bradley's on the East Coast. We are all over the place. All got a lot going on. But just wanted to take some time today, as always, to have the Hump Day Hangouts, answer some questions, talk to you guys, find out what's going on, see if we can help you out. So before we dive into the questions, of course, we got a couple quick announcements. And Chris, I think, is the only one who came through with the holiday cheer. So let's start with you, Chris. How you doing?
Of course, I couldn't resist. I just had to dig out the head, get my I don't know, it's just tea. I wish it was mulled wine or something like that, but this year it's just tea. And well, the only thing missing is the tree, but I will have that in a couple of days, if that's okay. Other than that, things are pretty good here. It's a bit cold actually here. I think we had -5 degrees today. But yeah, it's no problem for a hardcore Austrian.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, it hasn't been too bad here. I'm up around Seattle right now, waiting on a boat to actually take me back to Seattle. And yeah, we've had seeing some snowflakes, but not too cold, just a ton of rain. But that's what it is. It's northwest of the U.S. in the winter, so kind of par for the course. But Bradley, how are you doing today?
Good, except my damn camera's not working for some reason, which is bullshit, but whatever.
Yeah, the powers that be decided your holiday cheer was too awesome to share with the world, I guess.
Yeah, whatever. It's bullshit. I was all ready for this, and now my camera just stopped. And it's crazy because I can see my camera in mini cam, but Zoom is just showing the mini cam logo. So I don't know what the fuck it's doing.
You can share your screen while you're looking at the camera in video.
It just didn't want to cooperate today, so whatever.
Well, that's good. Well, we can still just focus on the questions. I did have a couple of quick announcements. If you haven't yet, you definitely want to subscribe. If you're on the Hump Day Hangouts page, you can scroll down, subscribe to our emails. We not only, send out updates as far as, when new Hump Day Hangout videos are posted, but also letting people know about the holiday special deals going on right now, which there's a lot going on, and those are going out to our subscribers as well as people in the Facebook group. So you definitely want to join one of those two, if not both, and hop on those deals. We got some just killer deals going on. I think we've already had some $1 deals, some 50% off deals. So a lot of fun stuff going on right now with that. Also wanted to say, if you haven't yet picked up the GBP process, whatever you want to call it, but the URL you have to go to is gmbprocess.com. Pick up Bradley's checklist there. That is, Bradley, I forget, pat yourself on the back a little bit. I saw the post in the Facebook group, but what did somebody call it? They were saying it's the most complete step-by-step checklist, without anything left out, basically, right?
Yeah, we got some really good feedback from it. And it's interesting because in that same thread, somebody was asking about the, how are your SOPs? Because most of the time when I get SOPs from that, there's a lot of big gaps and missing pieces and all that. And I was like, well, didn't my checklist kind of show you that my SOPs aren't like the rest of them? You know what I mean? Honestly. So yeah. It's funny, but yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of work that's gone into that. I'm actually working on full SOPs to execute all of those tasks within the checklist. My goal is to have those available for mastermind members by full SOPs so that they can literally just hand it to a VA and have the VA do everything in the checklist. My goal is to have that completed by January 28th. I've been talking about that for the last 3 or 4 weeks now. I set that goal about 2 months ago. As a matter of fact, I set it on November 22nd. So yeah, it's been about a month. I've got about another month to get it done. I'm on track. So anybody that's interested in that, come join the mastermind and you'll get the SOPs at the end of January.
Definitely. And like Bradley said, if you're interested in finding out more about the mastermind, you can head over to mastermind.semanticmastery.com. Anyone who's got an agency, if you're a consultant, if you're doing lead gen, or maybe if you have a brick and mortar business, we have some business owners as well in there. And, it's not only us and what we can share with you, but also the peer group in there is the power. And I definitely encourage you to check it out, especially as we're coming up on the end of the year, looking at this new year. This might be the place for you to really grow things in 2022. So again, that's mastermind.semanticmastery.com. With that said, guys, anything else we need to touch base on before getting into questions?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, then let's do it.
Right. Grab the screen since my camera's not working.
But you're not upset about it at all.
Not at all. All right, stand by, guys. All right, we should be good. Confirm, please.
I am on my phone out. Chris, can you see if he's sharing?
Yes, all good.
Cool.
Okay, cool. All right, so very few questions today. Okay, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up early. It is a holiday week, so I completely understand if people are tied up with family or traveling and all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense. I, on the other hand, am just nose down, head down, nose to the grindstone, whatever you want to call it. And been crazy, but we're actually trying to decide on a project management platform, and that's taken a lot more time than I expected. But anyway, all right, let's go. So this was a question that came from Facebook regarding several questions in the Google Business Process Checklist. Guys, remember, that is a lead magnet. In other words, that is the exact same checklist that we use, my team uses internally for all projects. And so there are essentially checklist items in there that my team knows how to execute, and I know how to execute. And I teach how to execute that stuff in the mastermind. Okay. So when somebody gets the Google Business Process Checklist free as part of like, hey, here's my checklist, some of those things that we talk about or that are listed in there are perfectly, described, or the training is in the mastermind. So I can't just reveal everything in the checklist on a free Hump Day Hangout, guys. That just wouldn't be fair to the mastermind members and wouldn't be fair to me for all the work that I put into that. So I just want to kind of clarify that to begin with. But, because we're getting a lot of questions about the Google Business Process Checklist. And, that's precisely what the mastermind is for. So you can get full on training on how to do everything in the checklist. Okay. So I'm going to keep directing you to that. I'm happy to try to answer some of these questions on a high level, but the individual details, that is what is behind closed doors. And you have to be a member in order to get that. And so on top of learning how to do it, I will be providing full SOPs so that you can hire a VA or just hand the SOPs to a VA and they can go execute all those tasks. It has the training built right into the SOPs. So you don't even need to train them. You just hand it to the VA. The only thing you would have to do is potentially customize the SOPs with login details to your specific tools and things like that. So I always create two sets of SOPs whenever I'm creating SOPs for the mastermind members. I always do it twice because I have to do it once for my own internal team first, which has all of my login details and everything to the tools that they need throughout the workflow, right? So if they get to a point where they got to log into another tool, then the login details are right there in the workflow, right? Does that make sense? So I then have to recreate the same SOPs that I give to mastermind members, stripping out all of that sensitive data, like account logins and things like that, stuff that is specific to my internal operations. So every time I create an SOP to share, I have to do it twice. It's an enormous amount of work. And I'm sure you guys are aware of that, because if it wasn't such an enormous amount of work, you'd have your own SOPs, right? You'd develop your own. So you guys, please understand that, when I give you a checklist or something like that in a public setting, it is because it's supposed to make things easier on you. But if you want the full training and SOPs, then that's what the mastermind is for. All right. So I just wanted to clarify that up front. All right. So let's get into this. I was reading your GMB checklist and I have some questions. There was a term, MREID. How do I find the MREID of the Google Business Profile? Well, that stands for Machine Readable Entity ID. How do you use the MREID? Well, I can show you how to get it. And how do you use it is, again, that's kind of more advanced stuff that I would only want to talk about behind closed doors, but it is basically the MREID URL that I put in the checklist is what's considered a knowledge panel only URL that references the MREID, the Machine Readable Entity ID. Okay. So it creates a SERP landing page. So a google.com landing page, like, search results page that only shows that brand's or that entity's knowledge panel. So it's a Google search results page that shows nothing but the knowledge panel for that brand or that entity. Does that make sense? That's what an MREID is, or at least the URL that I point in the checklist. So let me show you what I mean. If we go in here and we get the MREID URL template, which is here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Whoops. I'm going to show you guys how to get this. Okay. And what you do with it, again, guys, some of this stuff has to be behind closed doors, or else there would be no reason for us to have a mastermind anyway. Okay. So this is what the MREID URL looks like. You would replace your company name here, and in this ampersand KP, that's knowledge panel only, and KGMID. So this is the knowledge graph machine ID. And this is where you put your MREID code. Okay. So give me 1 second. I gotta probably have stuff open in Firefox client related that I need to close down before I can go into Firefox. So just standing by for a minute, guys. And I certainly did. Okay. Resume share. There we go. All right. So I'm going to go to Google and let's just search for, I don't know. Let me go with my, okay. Here's my TreeCare HQ agency website. So you got to do a brand search to pull your knowledge pan or your, knowledge graph. You got to do a brand search or whatever you got to do to pull the knowledge panel into the search results. Okay. Then just click into the map. You could probably do this with your CID URL too as well. Just go visit the CID URL in the browser. And then once it loads, then you just click up in this white section over by the brand name and click view page source. Once you're on there, you do a control F or, control find, and then you do /G/. Okay. And this is where you find this string of characters, guys. I know if I try to zoom in, it's going to skip where it is in the, so I'm not going to zoom in. I'll do this on the notepad file, but you see where it says /G/, and then there's a string of characters. It's this string of characters. And I believe, I always forget this, but I think you take that / off the very end or else it'll break it. So this is what is considered your MREID right there. Does that make sense? This is your machine readable entity ID, or another one is your knowledge graph machine ID. That's another term for it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this URL for a minute, paste this in, and I'm going to replace that token at the end of the URL with my copied MREID. Okay. Then I'm going to put my brand name in there where it shows. And again, we just go back to search results. In fact, let me back up and you'll see how they format the brand name in the, in this case, there are no spaces, but if there was, for every space in the brand name, you would put a + as opposed to a space, right? So in my case, it's just TreeCare HQ. So there we go. So you guys you see that now? Hopefully y'all will see that. That's the difference. This is the template, the URL template, and then you swap out the tokens for the brand name. You make sure you put + for any spaces, and then you put the knowledge panel ID or the knowledge graph ID, another term for that is MREID at the end. All right. Now look what happens when we go visit this URL. All it shows is a SERP with the knowledge panel. Does that make sense? So this is just a great signal here, like for clicking on that signal, because it and it's, again, a lot of that is not necessarily for link building purposes as it is for if you're doing click-through manipulation, right? So clicks on that is a good signal. So that's part of the reason that I use that. And I put that in the Google Business website as well as some other places like the ID page and things like that. So that when I'm sending traffic to those pages, and especially click-through manipulation traffic, so I can direct the bot like where to click and that kind of stuff, then I can click on those URLs and it's a good signal. Okay. So that's what an MREID URL is. All right. How do you use it? Do I have to put it in schema or just use the link for backlink purposes? Yeah, it's not really a backlinking thing. It's more of it's an identifier. So like posting it on the Google Business website is, and I usually hyperlink it with, the brand name. So I'll use a brand name anchor text to link to that MREID URL. And it's really because when Google's bots comes and crawls the Google Business website, as well as like the ID page, which is the other place that I use it, it'll read that URL and it recognizes that knowledge graph ID or MREID. Does that make sense? So it's more for the bots and for click activity than it is for link building. Like I don't recommend building links to that URL because it's really unnatural. Nobody would really do that, but having it, the brand name hyperlink. So the anchor text is the brand name hyperlink to that. So when the bots come and crawl your branded assets, such as your Google business website or your ID page, and then it's an additional identifier, right? It's another validator for that entity. It's an entity validation mechanism. Does that make sense? So that's what we do. You use it for. We don't use it for link building. I mean, you can test with that. I honestly haven't really tested with link building to it, because it just who would ever link build to something like that other than SEO? Now, not saying it can't be done, and it's actually probably worth a test. But I just haven't done that. I haven't tested it, so I don't know. Okay, and like I said, for me, it's more about an entity validation signal or mechanism than it is anything else. Okay. So do you guys use it in 2021? Because anything I could find about MREID was dated back to 2018 or 2019. You mentioned, okay, so that was like a run-on question. That was number 3, has 2 questions in it, I guess. Yes, I still use it, or else it wouldn't be in the checklist. Okay. I don't put things in those checklists for no reason, guys. They're there for a reason. You mentioned add metadata to the MP4 file, mp3tag.de. Is there any difference between using this software and adding metadata by clicking video properties? No, it's fine. You can do it that way too. So for those of you who don't know what he's talking about, if you on a Windows computer, if you go to navigate to an MP4 file and you right click on it and then click on properties, then you can add metadata to the file that way. You can do the same thing with JPEG images as well. Okay. It's just having a tool like that just makes it a little bit easier because it gives you an user interface, right, that you can use to add the data. But no, there's no difference at all. If you want to do it manually through video or through right clicking and going to the file properties, you certainly can. Number 2, ID page. By ID page, you mean place ID URL or CID URL or something else? No, I mean an @ID page. If you understand structured data, local business schema, you know that there is an @ID field in structured data for local business. And so we manipulate that by hosting an HTML page on an Amazon S3 bucket. That is, once again, it's very similar to the knowledge or the MREID, the knowledge panel only knowledge graph entity ID URL, in that it is a entity validation, right? It's an HTML file hosted on Amazon S3 that is basically an iframe stack structured data. It's the local business schema, and it just lists NAP, name, address, and phone number, and all the various iframes that from our entity stack that we built using the Google Business website, the Google Business map. What else do we link to? We do an iframe of the Press Advantage organization page. We iframe the ID page onto itself, Perl trees, all the different entity assets that we set up. The ID page, another term for this that we created when I first developed this which was way back in 2019. February of 2019 is when I revealed this strategy. An ID page. I kind of developed it on my own, and it was by accident. I was just doing some research on structured data, and I was trying to find out what ID page meant, because I knew it was in structured data, like local business schema, but I didn't know what it was for. And so I just started doing some research, and I spent an hour and a half or something like that, reading what I could on to find about it. And finally, I came across an article. I don't have it off the top of my head. I have it bookmarked somewhere, but I'd have to dig for it. But I came across an article that finally gave me a description, a definition of what an ID page is supposed to be used for in schema. And it was the first logical explanation that I had found for what an ID page was. And essentially it was saying that an ID designation is a URI, right? Universal Resource Indicator, I think is what that stands for, that has the entity information that Google will crawl. Like essentially it's a resource that the bots crawl that will validate the entity information, right? It's just a place where all of the entity data can be kind of kept or listed, and it's not supposed to change according to essentially it's not like the ID URL itself isn't supposed to change, and I think technically the information on the page itself isn't supposed to change. So I figured, okay, now that I have now that I have an understanding of what this is supposed to be for, how can we manipulate that? So I took an HTML page and just hosted it on an Amazon S3 bucket, because Amazon's got such high authority. And then I just a simple HTML template. And then I just went in and started adding structured data, local business schema, right? So, and then, so that's at the bot level, but then on kind of like the the viewer level, right? So the public side of things that people see, right? Not in the code behind that only the bots read. But on that, I just put, there's links to the branded assets, right? So the money site, the Google Business website, the CID map URL, it's got a map embed, the Google Business website embed, Press Advantage organization page embed. We link out to, so the name, address, and phone numbers there. You can also add like the Google Sheet from the Drive stack that I like to insert my citation URLs into the G Sheet and then embed that G Sheet into the ID page. That's a great way to get your citations crawled. So the ID page becomes a very, very important entity asset because it's an iframe loop. And that's originally what I called it when I first revealed this, what I had developed into this strategy. And again, that was in February of 2019, because I did a webinar about it in Syndication Academy. And since then, it really has evolved a bit, but not much. I mean, the structure of the ID pages had not changed at all, in that it's still just an HTML page hosted on Amazon S3, and it still uses an iframe stack. And that's incredibly powerful, guys. And what happens is, in case you guys haven't ever seen, like when you put two mirrors, kind of across from each other, and then you stand in between them and you look in one mirror, what happens? It's kind of the same thing when you're like on a webinar that's showing a screen share, and like you go to share your screen, and it does like that like never ending, like it gets smaller image after image, right? It's like that repeating image. It keeps getting smaller and it goes on for infinity. That's kind of what happens with an iframe stack. The spiders, the bots come in and crawl the page, and they get stuck in these iframes because they're iframe stacked on iframe stacked on iframes, and iframes stacked within iframes. And so the bots come in and they get kind of stuck in this never ending loop. It's like a black hole, and it just keeps feeding information back and entity validating information, right? And so again, the ID pages are a very, very important part of what we teach. Looks like I'm the only one on the webinar. My partner's dropped off, guys. I don't see anybody else.
No,
Oh,
I'm
Chris
still
is
here,
still
man.
Okay, cool. You had your camera off. That's why you disappeared.
Yeah, on purpose, like having a couple of bandwidth issues here, but I'm still here.
All right, so that's it, guys. The ID page is incredibly powerful. If you want exacts on how to do all that, the mastermind is where it's at, guys, and we can teach you about that. Or Syndication Academy. You can go, like I said, if you're in Syndication Academy, go look at the archives from February of 2019. There was a training done on that. It hasn't changed much. There's a few additional things that I do to the ID pages now that weren't done back then. Like I said, for one of them would be embedding the R by SG sheet. You don't have to do that, by the way. Like for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, if it's for a local project, which is all I do anyway, citations, they're hard to get, they don't get picked up or crawled often or indexed. And, it's not really all that important that they get indexed. I mean, it is to a degree, but the important thing is that they get crawled, right? The Google is aware that there's a link, a citation, right? So a mention of name, address, and phone number for the brand on a site. And sometimes they'll have a link, sometimes they don't, right? But either way, it's called a citation. With or without a link, it's still a citation because it's mentioning name, address, and phone number for that brand, that entity. So a lot of those, and if you do any sort of citation tracking, you'll know that you can build 100 citations this month or purchase 100 citations this month. And 3-4 months down the road, you still won't have all of them indexed if you're using citation trackers. And that's because they just take so long to get crawled sometimes, or they just don't index at all. So what can you do to help get more benefit from the citations that you build? Well, you can put them on an ID page because the bots come and crawl that page often. And so you can list them as like, in the sidebar or something like that. Or you can put them the easier way, which is the way I like to do it now, is just I put them right in the RYSG sheet, the keyword sheet, because you get 2 sheets with an RYS stack, at least the ones from the Heavy Hitter Club store you do. And I like to put all the citation URLs in the G sheet and then hyperlink the URLs with keywords, right? And then I publish the G sheet and I get the embed code and I put that in the ID page because again, it's all iframes mainly. And the bots come and crawl that. And now you've got all of your citation URLs that are going to get crawled because they're listed in the G sheet with keyword anchors going to them, if that makes sense. So it's a very, very powerful strategy. Not only that, but the ID page becomes one of my favorite link building targets too, because when you power up the ID page, you're powering up all of your assets, your branded assets, because they're all listed or linked to or iframed or all of the above in the ID page. Does that make sense? Very, very, very powerful, guys. And the ID page is just one of several different types of cloud pages that you can use to really power up your brand. So anyway, moving on. The next one was, do you add metadata to images also? Yes. Yes, I do. Geotagging images, that's in the Google Business Process Checklist. There's a note about that. Add geotagged images and then do text overlay. Again, that's all listed in the checklist that you're referencing. If yes, how do you add metadata? There's a number of ways to do it. I use Mass Optimizer Pro. Been using that for quite some time. There are free solutions such as geosetter.de, geosetter.de. You can download that for free. I've been using that for over 10 years. Well, about 10 years anyways. But I probably 2 or 3 years ago, I picked up Mass Optimizer Pro and I use that. There's an online version called the Exifer.net. I know that one's also another good one. Some people I know use that one. It's called the Exifer, I think, .net. I believe this is it. No, that must not be it. Anyway, whatever. Go find it. There are some, like I said, geosetter.de is free. The Exifer.net, I think, has a monthly subscription. So does Mass Optimizer Pro, but there's more functionality with some of those ones with subscription, such as being able to optimize batches of files with random Latin long points within a certain radius and all that kind of stuff. So depending on how aggressive you need to be with, I prefer using some of those paid tools more than the free ones, just because they give you more functionality. Okay. When you say text overlay, NAP, Gmap, share URL, do you reduce the opacity and make it very unlikely to be seen by eyes, or keep the text with medium opacity? Yeah, I reduce the opacity or increase the opacity or whatever. I'm not sure whether you reduce it or increase it, whatever. I make it to where it's less visible. Okay. But I usually set my settings to about the opacity or transparency level, because I use what's called visual watermark. And so they have a transparency setting, and I set it up to about 85% transparent. So it's about 15% visible. Okay. All right, moving on. Andreas says, happy holidays. I run a digital agency UK providing SEO, web, and app development. Wondering if it's a good idea to have a Write for Us section on my agency blog where I can accept contributor articles that are informational only, and will be carefully checked for, all will be carefully checked for quality, and I won't allow any promotional links and charge publishing fee. Do you think that is a good idea, or will I get a penalty? No, I wouldn't do that. And the reason why is because I've been testing, well, for the last 6 months or so, I've been doing a ton of link building with all different kinds of links. But prior to that, I spent about 6 months testing guest post links from a very specific service, and I got taken, man. I spent about $4 grand on guest post links and found out that only about 40% of them were valid. I mean, I got links on all of them, but only about 40% of them were worth a shit, because the other 60% of them were, on what they call orphaned pages, or what is called an orphaned page, which means they'll sell you on metrics and say, okay, you can buy a guest post on this. The metrics that you could purchase were either DA and PA, domain authority metrics, or you were buying traffic metrics, one or the other, right? There was 2 different kind of like scales that you could purchase links from. And so if I was to go buy an article on either one of those, 1,000 plus per month, traffic metrics, or a DA 40 plus site, and then I purchase spend $200 or $300 or whatever it was on a guest post link, and then 3 weeks, a month later, it gets delivered, and I go check the metrics. Of course, when it's first initially published, a lot of the times you won't see any metrics, especially if it was just published. But if you go back to it 3-4 weeks later and there's 0 metrics, then it means that there was no internal linking from that site to that post. So in other words, they published a post on the domain, but there was no internal links. There was no way to get to that without you knowing the URL. There was no way to get to that page or that post from the site itself. like through navigating in the site. Like there was no internal links to it. And so they sell you on the metrics, but then they sell you they publish it on an orphan page that has no internal metrics, which means you're not benefiting from any of the metrics from the domain anyways. So it was bullshit. You could have just gone out and created a free WordPress or Blogger or Web2 account and published a well-tuned article on that you developed in-house, and it would have done better than a link from an orphaned page on a site. Does that make sense? So the reason I started telling you all that is because throughout that process, which again, I spent about $4,000 and I pissed a lot of that away. And that's why when it comes to guest post providers, guys, you got to really, really vet your providers before spending a lot of money with any one of them, which is what I learned. It was a painful lesson, but I learned. Buy one guest post, get it delivered, and then check it and monitor it for a couple of weeks. Make sure that it starts to receive link equity from internal linking, right? And so that the metrics should start to improve automatically because it was published and it has internal linking. It's going to inherit some of the, the authority from the site if there's internal links pointing to it. Even if it's just one internal link, at least that's something. So, but throughout that process of kind of discovering that guest post providers can really screw you, I found out that also on a lot of those sites where you can buy a guest post, they say, write for us or, submit a post or whatever. There's certain lines of text that can be easily discovered, right? Because you can do a Boolean search in Google and find sites that have that published on their site somewhere, like write for us. Well, those are clearly people selling guest posts, and that is frowned upon by Google. So Google can very easily flag that site as any links coming from that site as being, for manipulation purposes, for search manipulation. So they can flag those. They can either become toxic links or they just won't give you credit for it. So my point is, don't do that. If you wanted to place a link onto a site that has that, write for us or publish a post for us or whatever, however they word it, it all means the same thing. It means, hey, we accept other people's articles for a link for linking purposes, if that makes sense. So I don't recommend doing it. Now, I know you're mentioning that you wouldn't do that, that you might say that what won't allow any promotional links and you charge a publishing fee. I mean, again, it depends on what it is that what your intent is for all of that. But I can tell you right now, it's very easy for Google to just determine that sites are, essentially selling links by, with a real simple, algorithmically, they can determine it really easily by just looking for stuff like write for us. You know what I'm saying? You see how it says write for us section, like, so things like that. That's what I'm saying. Just be careful, guys. If you're looking for other people to post content on your site, but you're not looking to sell links, then that might be different. But generally what I'm saying is it's very easy to determine. Guys, think about this. A lot of those guest post providers, they just go to Google and do Boolean searches to find sites that say write for us. And then they do outreach to those webmasters and say, hey, look, we'd like to publish articles on your site. Would you accept it? And of course they're going to say, yeah, sure. It's $20. And then they turn around and they sell them for 100. You know what I mean? So it's just better off if you're going to do that kind of a strategy, do it. I would have some sort of other method for requesting articles or, soliciting for writers to publish posts instead of just publishing something like that. Again, if you're not actually selling links, then it might not be detrimental, but I don't have any experience with that. All I have is experience with link sellers. And in some cases, those kind of write for us type blogs end up becoming toxic links, right? Because they've been flagged for manipulative, selling links to manipulate Google search results. So anyway, I know that was a long-winded answer, but I'm just trying to save some of you guys from, I'm not saying guest posts are bad. What I'm saying is you got to vet the provider. End of story. Like, had I known all that when I said, and I just didn't know, I just trusted the service that I was using. And I spent a lot of money, and only about, like I said, 4 out of every 10 links that I bought were valid links. 6 of them were orphaned pages, which means I got a post on a site on an orphan page that had no internal metrics, that then in order for that link to be valuable at all, I had to build a bunch of links to that guest post URL. Does that make sense? So what's the point of that when you could just go publish a well-tuned article on a free Web2 or on one of your branded entity assets, Blogger, Tumblr, WordPress, whatever, and then, you know, power that URL up, right? Power up that post on one of the web twos. If you're going to have to build links to it anyways, why spend $200, $300, $400 on a guest post link that you have to power up, right? The whole point of spending that kind of money on a guest post is that it's a powerful link. But if they put it on an orphan page, guess what? It's worthless. It's worthless. And I found out the hard way, and I'm just trying to prevent you guys from going through that same shit. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. Lucas says, Merry Christmas, Semantic Mastery. Merry Christmas to you as well. Wondering what your opinions are about dynamic text elements like the date and time in the footer or header. Do they help with freshness? I don't know. I haven't really tried to manipulate that. I mean, I know there are some plugins that will take old posts and refresh them, like republish them so that they appear to be fresh content and that kind of stuff. And I know that used to have an effect and it may still. It's not something that I test for, you know, as kind of a factor to manipulate. Because generally for all my clients, we do regular blog posting anyway, so it's not an issue. For lead gen sites, yeah, I mean, a lot of lead gen sites, we don't do any posting once they rank other than Google business posts. But yeah, I mean, we usually stop blogging once they're ranked for lead gen stuff. And maybe it might be worth testing that. Again, I haven't really done any testing with that in several years, Luca, because for clients, we regularly publish new content for clients anyway. So I don't know if that makes sense. He says, seems really hard. Hold on a minute. Lastly, when you're doing lead gen, how do you make sure you're part of the ongoing business? Lastly, when you're doing lead gen, how do you make sure you're part of ongoing business the client gets? I'm not sure I understand that. How do you make sure you're part of ongoing business the client gets? I'm not sure I understand that. If you're here, Luca, and you want to reword that, I'm just not following the question. Seems really hard to be tracking everything, or is there some trust involved for them to report closed sales to you? Okay, I think I understand now. That second part of the question provided some more context. Okay, so it depends on how you monetize your lead gen, guys. How do you monetize your leads, right? Are you selling on a pay-per? Are you doing a rank and rent where you're leasing the site? Because that's a flat fee. That's the easiest way to manage stuff, guys. Hands down, that's the easiest way to manage stuff for lead gen business, right? You just rank an asset. Once it starts producing, you lease it out for a flat monthly fee. End of story. You have nothing to track there, right? I mean, you still have to make sure that the asset is producing, but you have nothing to track except make sure that you're getting paid on a monthly basis. It's the easiest way to do it. The next way would be pay per lead, right? So pay per lead is they get charged a certain amount per lead, per qualified lead. Well, what constitutes a qualified lead? Well, if it's phone calls that you're selling, it could be phone calls and form fills, right? And so if let's just go with phone calls, for example, if it's phone calls, you could say any call that's over 45 seconds long is a qualified call. And if you're using tracking phone numbers, which you would have to do if you're selling pay per lead or pay per call, then you would be able to go check the analytics for the phone calls through that number, and you'd be able to determine which calls, what the duration of each call was, right? And in a lot of those phone tracking services, you can even enable recording. I don't. But you could technically listen to all the calls if you wanted, or hire somebody and have them listen to all of them. Again, I don't mess with that. For on pay per call, when I used to send calls directly to lead buyers, you know, contractors essentially, because that's all I work with. When I used to send calls directly to them, there would be a threshold, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever. And if they stayed on the phone that long, that was a chargeable call, period. End of story. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That was a chargeable call. If it was less than, you know, whatever that threshold was that we agreed on, and it depends on what their sales kind of like, you know, whoever's buying the leads from you, it depends on like what their typical process is for taking lead information, if that makes sense. So in other words, different industries are going to have different call lengths to determine what makes it a qualified billable call, or what qualifies it as a billable call, I should say. You know, for tree guys, a lot of times we would just settle on, you know, 45 seconds. If it was 45 seconds or longer, that was enough time for them to get the lead information, to answer questions from the customer. If it was under 45 seconds, it was most likely a solicitation call. It was a spam call. So they were just, you know, the contractor, the tree contractor would just hang up on them, or, you know, get off the phone, and it would be before 45 seconds generally. Right. So that's the way to do it. But the way that I do pay per lead is, and I started this in 2013, was I use a answering service. So it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365-day a year. I use answerconnect.com. I've been using them since 2013, but I send all of my calls from every one of my lead gen assets goes into a call center. The call center answers the phone. That way there is no dispute. First of all, all of the solicitation calls get screened out by the call center. Does that make sense? If you're doing lead gen, guys, you're going to find out that, you know, a lot of the calls that come through your assets are spam calls. They're solicitation calls from marketing agencies and people, you know, from India telling you that they're Google representatives and that they can get you to first page of Google and all these shitty calls that come through. You'll see that if you're generating calls directly and you're sending them to a contractor or a lead buyer, you'll find out that it pisses them off how many solicitation calls they get, how many spam calls they get. And so I found it was way better to go ahead and hire an answering service, and I direct every single call that comes through any one of my assets to a call center. The call center screens the calls. The contractor only gets notified of a lead when it's a valid lead and all of the information has been collected by the answering service. And then the contractor gets a text message and an email with the lead information. And then they call the customer back, right? The contractor, once they receive the lead information, they call the customer back to schedule the estimate. That's the way that I've been doing it since 2013. And it's been great because my contractors like that because they don't get bothered with answering the phone from sales calls, from spammers, right? And other SEOs and everything else. They only get notified when a valid lead information has been collected, right? And so that every one of the leads, every time they get notified, that's a billable lead for me because it's a pre-screened lead because I use an answering service. But if you're going to send them directly to a service provider or a lead buyer, then just know that, you know, there are thresholds that you can set. Again, it's going to vary by industry, but 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, those are typical kind of thresholds. Any call duration above that is a billable call. Any call duration under that is not a billable call. And then lastly, the third way that I monetize assets, which I do with several contractors, is what's called revenue share model. And that is where I get 10% of any job that is closed. So they're only paying for jobs that leads. They're only paying for leads that they got a job from, that they earned revenue from, right? And that does require a level of trust. So that's something that I don't offer contractors right out of the gate. Like we have to establish a good working relationship. Well, what is a good working relationship? Communication is good between us, and they've paid me on time for purchasing leads because we usually start on a pay per lead model. And then after, 2 or 3 months where they've paid me consistently for the leads that have been generated and communication has been good throughout those 2 to 3 months, then I might offer to them, hey, here's an alternative way that we can do business together. We can do a revenue share model, which is where I will still continue to send you leads, but you don't pay for any of the leads except until and unless you close the lead into you close a job and then I get 10% of that. And of course, whatever sort of payment or compensation arrangement you make on a revenue share model is going to vary by industry as well. In the tree service industry, I get 10% of whatever the contract price was. So if it's a $4,000 tree removal job, I get $400. If it's a $150 tree trimming job, I get $15. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how I've been doing it with contractors that I've established a relationship with. And then there's also additional things that you can do to kind of track that a little bit more. Like I use High Level as my kind of CRM and my marketing automation, app and all that stuff. And so for every lead gen asset that I have, under that sort of an arrangement with my contractor or my lead buyer, which is a revenue share model, they are forced to use my Tree Care HQ app, is what I call it, which is basically just High Level. It's a sub account that I create in High Level that it tracks all of their leads. And it goes like each lead that comes in goes into a pipeline. There's 5 stages in the pipeline. And that lead goes through the pipeline based upon what the contractor is doing with the lead. And when it goes to job close, then it notifies me that they owe me money. And I do that because it keeps track of all of the leads and I can very easily go back and confirm whether they're cheating me or not on, lying and saying that they weren't closing jobs when they were, because all the contact information and everything is all kept within the CRM, which is a sub account on High Level. Right. And so I force the Tree Care HQ app, again, that's what I call it, onto any contractors that are buying leads from me on the equity or the revenue share model, because that I tell them like, hey, look, this is another option. We can do it this way. Revenue share. I get 10% of every job that you close. You're only paying for leads that turned into revenue for you. However, in order to do so, you must use my app, and it's going to cost $100 a month to use my app. That's the only thing you got to pay, $100 a month, and then you only pay for leads. And that way I get revenue from my app, and also I get to track everything. Does that make sense? I've kind of developed a process for that. And by the way, I teach that same process, guys, in the mastermind. So what I just talked about, using high level and everything else, all of that I've already taught in the mastermind, and I'm happy to teach about it again if you want to learn how to kind of build these sort of automations into your business for lead gen. That's what I do, and I teach that. Okay. But yeah, you don't want to do revenue share models, guys, unless you have developed or established a good relationship. There has to be a level of trust, and you still have to verify. Trust but verify. You still need to do that, guys. I've had tree contractors in the past that, I always thought it was the funniest thing to have the dumbest thing for somebody to be on that kind of an arrangement, right? Where they're only paying for leads that made them money, and for them to lie and cheat and say that they weren't closing jobs when they were, because that's like killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Does that make sense? It's like, why would you ever screw that up? And I've had a bunch, probably less than 10, but more than 5. I've had more than 5 contractors over the years that I've caught lying to me, which is essentially stealing, by telling me that they weren't closing jobs. And then I verified or confirmed that they indeed did close jobs that they told me they didn't close. And so I'd fire them. I'd tell them flat out, you're fired, man. And I'd go find somebody else. And to me, I always thought that was funny. Why would people do that? But there's a lot of people out there that try to get over on you. So that's why I said trust, but you still verify. And I only offer that to contractors that I've established a relationship with. Okay. It's a good question, by the way. Vance says, afternoon, gents, just registered a new GMB location for a client. Now GMB wants me to do a video verification. Is there a way around this, since my client is about 800 miles away, looking for just a mail verification? Thank you in advance. Yeah, I mean, just in the last week, I've heard about that too, Vance. I haven't set up any new GMBs in about 3 weeks. And the last time I did it, it was still just the postcard verification. I honestly have not had time to even attempt a workaround on any of that yet. And I won't probably until February, to be honest. And hopefully by then, some other people will have figured out a workaround, and I'll be able to just use whatever they figured out. But I am fully booked from now until the end of January, because I'm trying to get these SOPs done that I talked about at the beginning of today's webinar. So I cannot mess with that. I'm sorry. I know I've had 18 people besides you, Vance, ask me specifically about that. Hey, well, what is your workaround going to be? I don't know, because I have not had any chance or any time to work on that, and nor will I for at least the next 5 weeks, because I've got literally I'm fully booked. So, I'm sure we will find a workaround, guys. We always do. And if it's not me, somebody will, right? Somebody will find a workaround, and we'll be able to, continue building lead gen assets. And if not, then we just have to shift our methods. It is what it is. That's the nature of what the business that we're in. We have to, roll with the punches, evolve as the, what we have to make adjustments so that we can make sure that we're still able to do what we need to do to make money. And if that, hopefully I'm quite sure there will be a workaround. If I don't discover it myself, somebody else will. I just don't have an answer for you right now. Okay. Yeah, that's and it's crazy, by the way, Vance, just because I had my goal for 2022 was to start building. And that's part of the reason I'm trying to get these SOPs done right now, is because I want to, systematize the process so that I can have my team just build lead gen assets. My goal, and I've said this several times over the last few weeks, but my goal for 2022 was to build and fully optimize a GMB every 2 weeks. So just consistently do that every 2 weeks for the entire year. And then in just the last week or 10 days, this whole video verification process thing popped up, and that might put a complete it might totally kill that plan for next month or next year, excuse me, which is fine because I got 18 other plans right behind that one. so if that one gets, sidetracked, then I'll just proceed with some of my other plans. That's fine. But, hopefully we'll be able to find a workaround is all I'm saying. I just don't have anything yet. Chris says, okay, that's Chris P.
Yes, that's me. There's one more question. Yeah.
Okay, cool. We're about done. Okay, you'd add full street address for service area GMBs as well on the images. No, Eric, I don't. Well, I mean, you can, but you got to be careful about that, because the reason I say that is because what if you can, as long as if you turn the opacity up high enough, or transparency, again, I'm not sure. If you make it transparent enough to where it's like not visible by the human eye, then sure, go ahead. There's the reason I say be careful with that is because if you're going to put the street address in it, even if you're hiding the street address, is if you're going to put it in the image, which it makes sense to do that because again, it's kind of an additional validation signal to Google about the name, address, for NAP, right? Name, address, phone number. So it makes sense I understand why you'd want to do that, but you have to be careful because if the text is visible at all, then a competitor could technically see it and, Google the address. And if they find out that it's a spammed address or it's a virtual mailbox or something like that, then they could report it. If it's a valid business address, even if it's a service area business, so you don't publish the address, but it is a valid business registered at its, like where the GMB is registered, is like, that's really where the business is. Like for, again, tree service contractors, very rarely do they have commercial buildings, right? Most tree service guys, contractors, run their businesses from their home. So their Google business profile is registered to their home address. And technically you're not supposed to do that, but tree service industry is one of those industries that Google allows it. Again, even if technically they say it's against terms of service, they allow it, and they have that for ever since Google Maps came into existence, or Google Places originally, I should say. Because I know that because that's like 80% of tree service contractors are registered, or tree service businesses are registered to a home address, a residential address. And so what I'm saying is and a lot of tree guys, depending on the areas, and I talk about this too, but you're not supposed to publish your street address if it's a service area business, because and the only time you're supposed to publish the street address for a Google business profile is if customers can come to to the business location to transact business, right? So that's what's typically it's called a storefront business, but there are some times where a service area business should also have a storefront. Let me give you an example, like a kitchen remodeling company. Well, kitchen remodeling is never done at the business location. It's always done at the customer location. But what if the kitchen remodeling company has a showroom? Then isn't it a service area business that should also publish a street address because it has a showroom where customers can come view countertops and cabinets and that kind of thing, right? So what I'm saying is there are some exceptions to that, but technically for a tree service contractor, and I'm just using that because that's the industry I'm in, but they go to the customer location to perform the work. Customers don't come to the tree care, the tree service contractor's house. But what I'm saying is, and you'll see that, like, at least in a lot of cases, not a lot of cases, but in some cases, you'll see, I will see tree service contractors publish street addresses. And so I will tell my clients, if like 6 out of the top 10 ranked Google business locations are displaying their street address and my client is not, then I'll tell my client, hey, listen, 6 out of the top 10, and I always use that. It's got to be 6 out of the top 10 or I won't do it. But if 6 out of the top 10 are displaying your street address, then I'll tell my client, hey, listen, Google's terms of service says you're a service area business, your street address shouldn't be published. However, 6 out of the top 10 competitors are, so that could give us a little bit of a boost. Is that okay that we publish your address? And I tell them there is some danger there because Google says it's against terms of service. However, look, all these people have it and they're there. Does that make sense? So I'm just telling you this because if you are not displaying your street address as per Google's terms of service, and then you decide to publish it in an image, make it to where it's not, if it's a real valid business location, you're probably fine. But if it's a virtual address or something that's technically not correct or not, that's against Google's terms of service, then I would be careful because a competitor could read the text, do a quick search, determine it's a virtual mailbox, and then report it as a spam listing. And next thing you know, it's suspended and you're screwed, right? So I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. Learn from experience. I've had some crazy things happen with GMBs. So last one, Chris says, I've had to do it and do the video telling them you are an agency for your client. I have had to do it and do the video telling them you are an agency for your client. Have your client mail you images of the front of the building and inside of the office, or better yet, quick videos to show them. Yeah, that would be good, Chris. I appreciate that. And that's actually a great way to do it if you're just setting up a GMB or registering a GMB for a client. I think where it gets tricky, Chris, is when you're trying to build, excuse me, lead gen properties. Excuse me. That's where it gets tricky, because then how do you validate it then? You don't have a client to provide you with those, verification signals, photos.
Their methods.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. I'm sure there will be some ways to pop up.
We'll probably cover it in the mastermind soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll figure it out. But again, it's not even something I'm going to spend any time working on right now, because I've got so many other things that have to be accomplished. But like I said, just be patient, guys. I'm sure if we don't figure it out first, somebody else will, and it'll get out. That's what we do in this business, right? We find ways to exploit Google. So
guys, don't forget to relax. Like, it's holidays. There's like 2 weeks of down period. So like after that, everything looks different, right?
Yeah. All right, there's a couple more. Let's see. Eric says, okay, I'm only talking about residential address registered GMBs that are set as service area business. So what about NAP on citations for service area? You hide street address on their citations as well. Yeah, again, and that's part of the reason. Eric, back to what I was saying. If it is a real business that is just registered to a home address, like a tree contractor, like I said, that's industry standard. It's normal in that industry for tree service contractors to run their businesses from a home address. Okay. So for that, if it's a real Google business profile attached to a real business, even if it's a residential address, then yes, I will publish citations with the street address, because it can be validated, is what I'm saying. I'm just saying, don't publish the street address if you can't validate that address. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So what I'm saying is, even if the street address is not published, in order to build citations, most directories are going to require a street address. So I will build citations with, again, only if it's a valid, if it is a spammed listing of spam GMB, like a pin drop method, or it's registered to a non-existent address, or if it's registered to a virtual mailbox or a PO box, something like that, then I just don't build citations. It's unnecessary. I mean, yes, citations help if you can build them, but I don't want to raise any flags by trying to have directories, publishing some fake spam listing address and that kind of stuff. So for genuine Google business locations, when I say non-genuine, I mean any kind of spam listing, I don't build citations to. But even for service area businesses, as long as it's a genuine business location, a real valid Google business profile tied to a real valid address, then yes, I will do citations with the street address published, because that way I can get the citations on more directories, right? And again, that's a conversation you have to have with the client, because some tree guys, most tree guys don't care, but some guys say no, they don't want their street address published. And if that's the case, then you're limited into how many citations you can build. And that's okay, because you can still rank without them, but they do help. There's no question, they do help. So I don't know. Hopefully that was clear. 5 o'clock on the money. This worked out. I thought we weren't going to have enough. I just talked a lot today. That's all.
All good.
Thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Enjoy your Christmas with your family, guys. For all of you that celebrate it, those that don't, well, happy holidays nonetheless. We'll see you all next week.
Cheers. Bye-bye.